Hi, this is Serena Sun, founder and director of Breaking Taboo. Today, we will be joining Julianne Vacarro, who is a somatic sexologist. Ooh la la. How are you doing today, Julianne?
I'm doing excellent. I'm over here in Denver, so it's pretty hot, but it's dry. So,
What's the
how about you?
temperature today in Denver, Colorado?
It's probably about like 96. It's
Oh,
close to
wow.
100. Yeah.
Geez. Yeah, I think ours over here in LA is like 92 today. So,
Mm.
but yeah, I have not been out all day. I know it's so bad. That's like what happens in summer without a gym nowadays is like I don't even want to go out and take a walk. But I have it in my calendar for later, for like 7 o'clock. Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully it happens.
Yeah, when the heat goes down, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Julianne, I've gotten a chance to, check you out and check out what you're all about. I was telling you this during our preliminary call that I absolutely love the energy that you're putting out there. And there's so much like female empowerment and what you call goddess energy, right? So I love it. You're a total goddess based on, everything that I've seen on your social media and stuff. So I love how you empower that. And of course, being a sexologist, I'm sure you're all about, empowering women's sexuality and things of that nature. So first of all, I have to ask you, somatic sexologist, what does that mean? Somatic being of the body and of physiology. Can you explain that a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So to kind of simplify it really well, somatics, like you said, just means basically dealing directly or relating with the body. So it somatic sexology and the approach that I was trained under is somewhat of a combination of a whole bunch of different methodologies and trainings in one practice. So somatics is the first half of the table work session that I do where it's somatic therapy. So basically everything is energy, even our emotions, so energy and motion. And so when we have negative experiences or we've had traumatic experiences in our life or we've grown up in um, like emotionally abusive, and I say all of that with a little like I like to expand on it because I think that trauma can feel really big but we all have trauma and we all have like limiting beliefs and societal programming and all of these things, and so all of these things get stored in the body. So basically what I do with somatic therapy is you're actually giving the body a space to finally feel safe enough to basically like complete the stress cycle. So when we have these experiences, most of the time we're not completing the cycle in the body, and so the energy gets stuck and trapped, and then we start to feel stuck and trapped, and we kind of are like our voices start to quiet down. We're not as fully expressed as we were when we were younger, like when we had our little girl or our little boy, that energy within us. And so with somatics, you're giving the body a space to complete the cycle and to kind of rewrite the way that some of those experiences or traumatic experiences have went. And with the sexological component, it's quite similar, where in the same way that we hold these stuck emotions and experiences in the body, the same thing happens with our sexuality. And what I find is that sexuality is such a great place to hide these things. It's a great place to kind of hide ourselves because it's dark, right? And it's a little bit more secretive. It's so taboo, right? That's why we're here. And so,
Breaking taboo.
totally. And so it lives in our sexuality, like shame lives deep there. So with the sexological portion, it's quite similar and really letting your full, authentic, erotic self come out and clearing any energy or stuckness that's left in the body or left in your sexuality so that you can really access your full potential to feel here, like feel all of the pleasure that's available for you, feel all of the joy, all of the bliss, and to go deep into full body ecstatic pleasure.
Oh, that is so interesting. I mean, so there was a lot there that you spoke to. But what exactly do you mean when you say, the trauma that's in our body? Like, what is like, how does one know? How do you know? Like, what does that feel like? How does it manifest?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll first talk about trauma. So there's big T traumas and there's small T traumas. Small T traumas are going to be things like the ending of a relationship or not getting your emotional needs met. It could be a move that's kind of traumatic, or there's a wrench in what you're used to. And then the bigger T traumas are going to be things like a death or a loss of a loved one, a really big traumatic car accident, those like grander scale experiences that we might actually never kind of have. Most of us have small T traumas, and science says that a collection and accumulation of these small T traumas can equate to the same impact in your psyche and body as a big T traumas.
Wait,
So
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but just a
that's okay.
question there. But when you say big T and small T traumas, I've noticed that some people tend to integrate traumas on different levels. So something that might be a small T trauma for one person could in fact be like really, really impactful for another person, and vice versa. Something that was that, you know, I guess for one person is like hugely traumatic, for someone else might not be as traumatic. So how do you like typically categorize this? Would it just be, I'm assuming, based on the individual, or is it actually like in science they will say like these are the big T traumas and these are the small T traumas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that, and that's part of why I explain like the difference between small and big T, because like I kind of mentioned before, what I find most of the time is that, and this was really what I did for so much of my life, was like just bypassed my whole human experience, like totally downplayed the experiences that I had, didn't think they were like valuable enough to look at or to be categorized as traumatic experiences because they weren't as bad as somebody else that had these bigger traumas. And so I'm sure that science has, I mean, kind of the breakdown that I gave you is what I would say science labels big and small T traumas. But what I find is that most of us, like I said, have these smaller T traumas and they collect and they build up, right? So it's like we have one experience, and this one experience might not affect, like, let's say I have traumatic experiences and it affects me one way. You might have the exact same thing and it might not spark that same level of like trauma in the body based off of, it could be societal program, it could be based off of like identity, culture, all of these different moving pieces that might have you experience that thing differently. For example, you walking on the street and getting catcalled, some women might freaking love that. Like they might be like, oh my God, filling up on that attention. And they might actually like really like that exchange. Whereas another woman might feel really violated. And so what I find actually with doing somatic based work is that the relationship that you have, yes, to your traumas, but also the way that you show up in the world greatly shifts. So for me, for example, and this will go back to your original question, but like, how does it show up in the body? How do you know that you have trauma in the body? For me, it was, to give a little bit of a background story, I have always struggled with eating disorders, and I was an NPC competitor and boxing and yoga teacher. And so I was always in the fitness space. So everything in my journey was very much tied to my body. And so over the years, and I started to unlearn those pieces and heal the relationship that I had with myself, my body, and food, and really peeled back those layers. I recognized how much trauma I actually had growing up. There was physical abuse, there was emotional abuse, and I kind of just numbed it out and bypassed it and never thought it was big enough to be considered trauma. Yet it was really running in the background of everything that I had. And so I found myself in one abusive relationship after the next, mirroring this story of love and abuse. So for me personally, when it came to a breaking point, it was at the end of an abusive relationship that ended in a sexual trauma. And I had done like so much work. Like I had done so much talk therapy, I did so much counseling, personal development, like I did all of the things. And as soon as I went back into the dating space and tried to be intimate with partners, my body would just completely lock up, and I would almost feel like I would be able to access these deeper wounds that I couldn't tap into before having those experiences. And so for me, it showed up in that way. It showed up like I was locked out of my body. It was so unsafe in my body. I felt so unsafe with men. I felt unsafe with women. I felt like I would walk into a room and I would just watch my life through a movie screen. Like it would almost, like I'd walk into a restaurant or whatever, and I would see and witness myself from an out of body perspective, never actually from my own two eyes. And so as I got into the somatic work, I realized that it was because of all of this trauma that I had experienced. I just kind of flew up and out, and I dissociated, and the flight response got me out of the body. And so I think that it shows up for a lot of people, like they're not living in their body. They're not landed in this lower region of where they are. They're very in their head. So we can get like super stuck in our head and our story, the inner critic. It's really loud, and it's hard to hear our soul's voice, or like our authentic self. So usually there will be like throat contraction, not expressing our truth, not feeling safe is a lot of how it shows up. And so then that just limits our full expression. And I think that the body does a really good job at doing the best that it can, right? Like the body's always going to do whatever it can to keep you safe. And I think that it's really when I think we have sometimes this like huge awareness come through of like, oh, I'm maybe not able to access the joy that I used to have. Something like that can be a really good indicator, because the body's, again, always doing really good at keeping us to feel good. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I have my own experience with physiological trauma. Uh, it's it's not sexual physiological trauma, but it's interesting, like just reminds me of what you were saying about the body holding on to trauma and then it manifesting in certain ways. Like, long story short, I experienced an episode of syncope, which is a passing out, fainting, actually after I had like an edible just like this small. I had like an edible that was like literally this big, of like a chocolate, and then I actually passed out in Barney's Beanery, just like, just got up and boom, I was like on the floor. And luckily my friend and someone else there like caught me and carried me, and I was in the ambulance, and it was like just really like a traumatic night, because I literally thought I was gonna die. Like, that's like what my body felt like, and I was afraid to close my eyes and things. But then after it happened, I was kind of like, oh, haha, that's kind of funny, I just kind of like let it go and just went about my life, like, thank goodness nothing happened to me, whatever. But then what's so interesting is that for a good year and a half afterwards, I would like experience these feelings of like almost like passing out again. Like, I'd be driving and all of a sudden I would get like really dizzy out of nowhere, and then I'd be like, okay, you know what, it's just your anxiety, calm down. But for a while, I thought that there was actually something wrong with me. I thought there was something physiologically wrong with me, and I forget exactly where or who said it. I think I might have ended up in the ER after like a misdiagnosis from a doctor who told me I had asthma, gave me an inhaler, never tested me for asthma. I never had asthma. So that actually, it made me hyperventilate one day. But I think it was a doctor in the ER the second time that told me, when I was explaining this to him, he was saying like, you probably have physiological trauma from what had happened to you before, and your body, even though you feel like mentally and emotionally okay, like your body is still holding on to that experience. And so that was actually the first time I heard ever of physiological trauma, of that term. And I knew, like, the first time I've ever experienced where like everything else can seem okay, but our bodies kind of remember, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, in the animal kingdom, it's like there's four trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so in an animal kingdom, like if you were getting chased by a lion, um, and let's say you got away, like as an animal, if you watch dogs, if they like almost get hit by a car, they'll shake it out. Like they literally shake the energy out of their bodies. And so
Right.
it's the same thing when we're babies. Like, I think for a lot of us, our parents would say like, just shake it out. Like you got hurt, blow on it, shake it out, just whatever. And you kind of just, you let it run its course. Or maybe you have a temper tantrum in the corner and you let yourself get fully angry and you get all of the energy out of the body and you move forward. And it's like it never happened. But for adults, we've been trained by society to not go there. Like, you can't get angry because then you're an angry person, or like you might hurt somebody. And so it gets recycled. And so when we react from like, for that, for example, your story is like a physiological response, right? And it can happen from that way, or it can happen from emotional things, but it is this reaction. And when I say reaction, I mean like you react the experience that you've previously had. And so you're recycling this memory over and over, because the body almost kind of like gets stuck in a way. And to give you some more examples too, I think for me, a lot of it and the way that it manifests in so many individuals is just pain and disease and illness. Like it kind of sounds simple, but if you think about it, if we're constantly collecting these energies, whether they're our own or from we witness a car accident and we jolt, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly collecting these energies and experiences. So a lot of times it shows up in illness and it creates stress in the body, and everything comes from stress. So with me, it was a lot of like hip pain, and my right hip was I had surgery on it in high school. And so I would always get this hip pain. And after the somatic work, it's gone. If I'm in sticky situations where, let's say, I don't feel safe and I'm even like in a sexual experience, it'll act up. And I know that it's actually communicating with me. The right hip holds a lot of abandonment wounds. The left hip holds some
Yeah,
more
it was
like
that
betrayal.
that made me think of that school of thought. Yeah, I was talking
Mm,
to a holistic healer once, and she was saying how because I think I was experiencing some type of stomach pain or something, and then she was saying like, oh, this is like the stomach represents this, and this body part represents that, and I'm like, where did this all come from? Do you know where
mhm.
it came from?
Yeah, I mean, Oriental medicine has a lot of those like different organs will
Oh,
hold
really?
different things, and also like the different meridian lines. So, for example, the tissue that's in our yoni, which is just a sacred word for vagina, is the same tissue that we have in our throats. So, the
Mm.
more that you open, the more that you actually open your yoni and you relax and you surrender and you can kind of like unarm, like de-armor your heart. The more your
Mm.
throat opens, the more expressed you are. So there's a direct link from your yoni to your throat and also from there to your heart. Like the energy travels up through your chakras. And so it's all intertwined and connected for sure.
That is so interesting. Can you educate us a little bit on the some of the body parts and what they do represent if you do experience pain there?
Yeah, so the right hip is and this is all very kind of like general.
Mm.
Generally speaking, this is where things can hold. So for the right hip, it's going to be more abandonment. For the left, it would be like betrayal, rejection usually gets stored there. And the hips just hold so much. Like they hold so much. And then the other way of looking at this is masculine versus feminine. So the right side of the body is going to be the masculine side, the left side is going to be feminine. Your stomach area will usually hold a lot of like familial pain, sexual trauma, grief. The chest is usually tight when there's like a lot of armor and like we've locked ourselves out of like feeling, and maybe the world hasn't felt safe, and so we like actually literally energetically armor our hearts so that we can't let anything in, but we also can't like we can't let the bad stuff in, but we can't let the good stuff in either or out. um Shoulders are typically where we just like carry the weight of the world.
Mm.
And like I
I
went
always have
for
shoulder pain.
yeah, I went for somatic sessions a couple of weeks ago. I usually go for like just cleanup like once a year. And I like, as I get closer and closer to this like yearly maintenance work, I'll kind of feel like my shoulders kind of slumping and I'll hear like the chatter in my head get a little louder. Like the voice will get louder in my head, like the criticism, the judgment. Um,
Mm.
and then I'll also feel like my body start to close. And so, and I'll use personal example, but like all of the issues and the pains that I've had in my body have always been on the right side. And so much of my work has been with men, with the
Mm.
masculine, not feeling protected, not feeling safe. And
So
so
you
that's an
work
example.
so you work mostly with men, with male clientele.
I work mainly with women. I mean, like my own personal work in healing my relationship to the masculine and with
Oh.
men,
Mm.
which has also allowed me to drop deeper into my feminine.
Oh, okay, okay, I see. But okay, so for the somatic sexology part, do you work? Do you see an equal amount of men and women, or is it mostly women for your
It's
clients?
mostly women, but I do have like training and experience with men as well. And a lot of the work that I do is also relationship dynamics, relationship coaching, sex coaching. And just recently I've gone more into like the dominant submissive space. And so
Mm,
um, to me, it's this
interesting.
like man relating, like relationship energetic dynamic.
Tell us about that, the dominant submissive.
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely.
lots of people are curious after 50 Shades of Grey, which, by the way, is really not.
No.
not how it is. Yeah. But yeah, I'll leave it up to you to tell us how does it go? Dominant,
Sure.
submissive.
I mean, this is still a new area for me to be exploring, and it's when I actually started watching. I read all the books, but I wanted to rewatch them, the movies from like the position that I'm in today of like, okay, kind of like where's the wrong in this?
Mm.
Not to find the wrong, but I there was a movie called The Secretary. I think it's actually from
Yes, they're so similar. I keep telling people
yeah,
this. Great movie, really great
totally.
movie. Maggie Gyllenhaal, Jake
Hmm.
Gyllenhaal's sister.
Yeah,
And yes, I was so surprised. I was like, did the author of 50 Shades of Grey watch this movie and somehow get like in her subconscious?
totally.
Because the guy's name is Mr. Grey.
Totally.
It's the same name,
Totally.
same concept. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And if you watch those movies, like stay curious, and I would almost encourage you to like feel into your body as what feels off in some of them. Like there's no consent. Like in 50 Shades of Grey there's consent, but there's also like not consent. There's no mapping of what a scene looks like. There's so many pieces that are not there. And so there is, like you said, this like misleading of what BDSM is. But I really found my way into the space through my mentors, and like I mentioned, my own personal like inner work for me has been really coming home into my feminine, but it was from a history of abuse that made me not feel safe with men, like men in my life not coming in to protect me against these abusive situations or things like that. And so it's kind of my work has been in finding respect and really valuing and knowing that it's okay to need men, and that in fact we do need men, and that it actually allows us as feminine beings to drop deeper into our chaos, to drop deeper
Mhm.
into our feminine eros when the masculine is there to hold the container, to take the frame, to have all of the control with responsibility. And so the BDSM space, specifically the DS space, is for me like a beautiful way of surrendering even more into that,
Mhm.
to trust men, to also witness healthy dominance. Like I think that, and this is so much of what has it sparked within me as I go deeper into this space, is like I think that so much has flipped in the last couple decades. Like we've grown up in, not we, but like the world has operated from this patriarchy, right, where women have been taken advantage of and totally repressed, and sexual expression has been just like chopped off, like the witch trials, all of these
Mhm.
things, right? And so the script has been flipped and feminism has arisen, and so now women can do anything they want, and we
In
can run
certain
our
parts of the
six
world.
figure totally, like in certain parts, and we can run our six figure businesses, and we can do all of these things. And so there's been this now like just like stepping on men, like totally emasculating them, taking them out of their dominance and their power. And so with the DS space, it's actually like, as a modern empowered successful woman, which I think so many of us identify with, like the independent, don't need no man, we don't need any help kind of a thing. Like, can you surrender the ego in a way and submit and surrender to your man and his brilliance and his wisdom to actually like take the control and the responsibility that you don't want to freaking hold? It actually drains you and it burns you out.
Mhm.
And can we have this kind of like super respectful space with our partners or the men in our lives? And I think that it's a totally different approach to relationships and what we've seen recently, and can be kind of dicey for those that have perhaps had a similar experience to mine, or feel very resentful towards the patriarchy and to the masculine. But I think that as feminine beings, or vulva bodied beings, you really identify with like a feminine essence, like it's taxing and it leads to burnout. So I think that in that kind of a space and dynamic, you can kind of just melt into who you truly are, into your true essence and your eros.
Yeah, yeah, that's just so interesting that you're saying that as someone who deals with empowering women a lot. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree as well. I mean, I think that there's nothing wrong with taking more traditional roles sometimes, because a lot of times there for a reason. Is biological, evolutionary, like, you know, that is who we are, and it doesn't really benefit anyone to deny that if it is a part of your true authentic self, you know. I mean, so what? Like, if I'm cooking in the kitchen, you know, for my man, I like doing that type thing, you know. It's
Totally.
and so what if I still like to bake, you know, cupcakes and whatever? Like, that's something that I enjoy and empowers me.
Yeah,
And at the same time, it shouldn't take away from a woman working. It shouldn't take away from me being a CEO or a boss or whatever. Like, you know, it should not take away from any of that. And to add on to that, a man should be able to do all that as well. If he wants to go cook in the kitchen and be a chef, okay, awesome, cool. You know, like, what are you cooking for dinner tonight? You know, it's like, so I see it. And I think you touch upon something else, which is just the overall, which comes up a lot, especially in the work that I do with depression, suicide, mental health, finding help. You know, it's the key of finding help and allowing people to help you. And that doesn't matter whether you're male or female. You know,
mm-hmm.
there's just like such a taboo around getting help, or this especially Western ideology of like being independent and being like, you know, an individual, not needing anybody type things,
Totally.
sometimes actually prevents people from relying on each other and leaning on each other, which I always say also, you know, that's, we're human beings, it's human nature. You know, that's like in the beginning, like since the freaking like Stone Age, you know, we've had to rely on each other as a tribe to get through, you know, all the tough times. Otherwise we human beings would never survive and get to where we are today.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so yeah, that's just my my 2 cents on that whole thing. But yeah, I totally absolutely hear what you're saying around that. And the question I have for you is, you know, what are some of the more common problems? Like, we're talking, oh, sorry, actually, before we get into that, we were just talking about BDSM, which is a whole other thing. Don't let me go on these tangents. It's like, you got to get back to what we were talking about. Yeah, so BDSM. And so I find it interesting that you're equating it to like the male female, like male dominance, because I've also seen a lot of cases of BDSM where it's females being the dominant. Like, that happens a lot, and males kind of want like a break and a relief from always feeling like they have to be the dominant one in society. So they seek out, you know, that type of release by being a submissive as well,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, well, I think to kind of reflect on that piece and then the community aspect, and to go back into what you were saying with like, so what if I want to be in the kitchen cooking? It's like the dynamic, like I think originally, I think like when you think of the word submissive or submit, like how does that actually feel in your body and in your system? It might have some charge and some friction there. And I think that a lot of us think that it's like you're giving all of your power away. But even if, and like if you watch The Secretary, like there's a lot of like things that I think are off about it. But like you see in the end where her submission to him is her letting him take the reins and literally take care of her. So like you being in the kitchen and doing the dishes, it might actually require a little bit more work for you, but it's actually like allowing your partner to fully take care of you, and also you're keeping that polarity there. So I think that polarity is another really big important part of that. And when I say polarity, I'm talking about like the chemistry, the sexual chemistry that's there, that gets fed when there is a dynamic like that. So like for example, if you want your man to like be your puppy dog during the day and like listen to everything that you want him to do and what you want him to wear and cook the food and blah, 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 and then you want him to go take you in the bedroom and to like fuck you really good, it's like that's a big shift. Like he's not like,
It was very
you need to,
common.
yeah, and you need to
Yeah.
build up his dominance in all areas, like give him his balls back in a way. And so I think we're talking about it from that way. But then to answer your question about the other part, I think that my feedback for you listening or for you like contemplating this is like what feels best for your system. Like you being a submissive as a woman, that might not actually feel that good. And I think I would stay open and curious as to like why. Like there might be some deep programming in there. Like I think a lot of this journey for me has been around like actually humility and being humble and um surrendering my sword
Mhm.
against the men and against the world. Like really coming into a place within myself of like, I can put my armor down and I can put my sword down and I know it's there if I need it, but like, I don't want to be the fighter anymore. And that
Mm-hmm.
feels good for my system. So like what feels good for your system? Does it actually feel better to be in your dominance? Do you want to like, what space do you want to go into and what space feels best for you and your body?
Right. Yeah, no, very well said. Yeah, absolutely. And it's different for everyone. I mean, sexuality is so different for every single person out there. I remember one of my
And
favorite
it's fluid,
courses.
like it's
Right,
always changing.
exactly. Yeah, one of my favorite courses in psychology was human sexuality. And I remember we had like a really cool, hip professor, actually. And she had like punkish dyed hair and a piercing. And she was all like, okay, how many people here masturbate? And then she's like, okay, wait, actually, how many people here don't masturbate? Raise your hands, you know?
Mm,
And it was like it was really interesting. And then she actually like went ahead and was like, okay, why don't you masturbate? To like the people that raise their
damn.
hands. Yeah.
You
And
publicly put him on the spotlight.
she was one cool professor, I'll definitely say that. But in that course, you know, it was such a one of my favorite textbooks, actually, also because we just dived through so many different forms of sexuality and sexual
Mm,
everything from well, all the taboos, but fetishes, all the sexual fetishes. And then you really come about it after learning all of this, you know, you really start to realize, like, wow, there really isn't much of anything that is like super weird or whatever, you know, like people just have a lot of different thoughts and things that turn them on. And you know, unless they're breaking the law in some way, you know, a lot, or unless it's like impeding their ability to function or to orgasm or to, you know, have a good sex life with their partner, there's really nothing wrong with most of these things that are taboo, right?
mm-hmm.
That people, like, a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like men like think this way. And it's like, no, no,
Totally.
no. Like, yeah, it's actually really normal. It's more normal than you would think. But I think, again, you deal with this a lot, Julianne. Probably it's the taboo. I'm sure there's a lot of shame around these topics, right?
Absolutely.
So how much of it, how much shame do you see with the clients that come to you, and how much does that play into, you know, the problems that you help them resolve? Also, that's a multi-layered question. Also, what are some of the problems that you often see in your clients?
Yeah, so I think the shame piece is so important because I think that shame is such like a deeply rooted piece, and I think it's Brene Brown that talks about perfectionism and says like underneath perfectionism is shame, and then underneath that is actually unworthiness. And so I think that wrapped around our unworthiness or like not enoughness is this deep shame about who we are. What I believe and the outlook that I have is that like everything is rooted in our sexuality and everything kind of stems from there. Like it's the most powerful energy that we have access to. It's one of our like primal instincts. Like if you think back to when you were a little girl or a little boy, like she or he knew where their pleasure was, right? And like we knew that those parts of our body felt good. We might not have known the whole thing, but we knew that those parts of our body made us feel like good and alive and connected to ourselves, to even maybe something bigger, until we
Like,
started to
how
get
young are
shamed.
you talking about? Like, you're saying that for most children, they know?
Yeah, I think like I would say like 5 or 6. A lot of, especially the women that I work with and myself included, like there's memories coming up on the table like 5 or 6 years old, self-pleasuring, and then maybe you get walked in on and you get shamed, and then you never do it again, or you think it's wrong and self-pleasure and sex is wrong for the rest of your life because it's
Oh
so
my
deeply
gosh, I
embedded.
had no idea that was normal. I
Yeah,
always thought I was like the only one.
I had a tantra teacher that said once that she would get shamed all of the time from her parents, and one year on Christmas they gave her coal
Oh,
because they said
wow.
one more time, like, and that's it. And so she now, like, every year under their Christmas tree, she self pleasures to like reprogram her story. Like that
Mm.
would be an example of like somatically shifting that memory. Um, so I think that shame is deeply embedded in our sexuality, and I also think that shame feeds in the darkness. It feeds in our secrecy, and so where else but to hide our deepest demons than in our sexuality? Because who's
Mm-hmm.
going there, right? Like,
Interesting.
yeah.
So
And
how do you
so
see it manifest?
I think that a lack of authentic self-expression is one piece. I think that for men, I would say there's like an unhealthy dominance, like a toxic masculinity where they might not, they're not like grounded and rooted in who they are. And so then they like vomit their toxicity up all over everybody. And so
Mm.
I think um, there's that piece, like lack of confidence or like an overly confident expression that's just totally a facade. And then I think for women, there's a lot of like inability to receive pleasure, like just
Mm.
totally checking out of the body, dissociation, like not able to really connect with our partners and our lovers, even when there is deep intimacy, trust, and love there. There's like such a big lack of safety in the body that there's an inability to like be in the experience fully, to use our
Mhm.
voice, to share our desires. Because there's also all this programming that says if you like sex, you're a slut. If you speak what your desires are, like you might be bossy or you're going to be the whore, like whatever labels and societal programming that you have. It's all learned and it's all like covered in our sexuality. And so I think that it shows up that way a lot for women, and there's kind of this like stuckness that is felt, what I see, where there's this like dance between I really want to be over here and I like want to fuck really hard and I want to be this like sex goddess and I want to have wild, crazy, full body orgasms, and I want to go to like a pole class, and I want to do this and this, but then there's this other piece that's like, but I can't, and like it's not safe. And if I did that, like it's basically what I see is there's this like decision of defeat that was made earlier in life that said, like if I do this, I'm gonna get punished, and there's gonna be like a big punishment for this. And so
Mm.
there's kind of like a lockdown or a big dissociation, or it's the opposite where there's like an over flaunting of our sexuality where it's like, oh, I have a trauma, but it's totally fine. And like my sexuality is my place of expression. And it's like this like boasting when really there's like this deep seated pain. So I think it can kind of go either direction.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Um, so how do you typically like treat clients? Let's say if a woman or anyone comes to you, a woman or man with inability to orgasm, how would you go about treating that as a somatic sexologist?
Yeah, for inability to treat orgasm, I think that's an inability to orgasm. I think that's a big one. Um, I think I like kind of like to take two approaches, like look at the logical side of things, and then let's also look at the physical side of things. And
Mhm.
so what when I say the logical side, I'm saying look at the programming that you've had. Like what's your religious programming? What did you learn about sex when you grew up? Was it shameful? Did nobody talk about it? What was your education like? Did you learn about it from porn? Did you learn about it from friends? Did you never get the talk from your parents? Like what did you witness from the relationships that you've had in your life? Like how was mom and dad? How were your grandparents? How did your siblings talk about it? Because that's a huge piece to it. And I think that the religious piece has a much deeper embedded piece in our bodies, like
Mhm. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm sure you get a lot of people who have been taught things from religion, or a lot of cases where religion plays a huge part in certain blockages in their sexuality or shame in their sexuality. And how do you deal
totally.
with that? Because I mean, if someone, if someone is still with of that religion and still, still like going to church all the time, and they're being told like one thing from their parents and from church, and then another thing from you or from, I don't know, Sex and the City, TV shows or whatever, or they just want to like get more in tune with their sexuality, but they have all this programming and they're still religious. Like, how do you even go about uh, handling that and treating that?
I think it varies in the person. I think it would probably depend on their devotion and what their practice is like. Like I think, again, going back to that like logical side of like what's the programming, I think that many of the clients that I've worked with and had interactions with and coaching packages with have had a really deep religious background, and there becomes this shift where you almost start to separate from that ideology and you start to find your own truth and your own, yeah, like your own truth ultimately. and what you really want to believe, right? Like we start to question things because we start to maybe see that there's another way of doing it. And so I think if there's anybody that's listening here that is perhaps making that separation and doesn't want to make a full separation, that's totally okay. But looking at, like anything in life, what feels true for you and what can you integrate into your life that feels good. So maybe there's just parts of it that don't feel good about religion and sex for you, and you can leave those parts out and you can reframe them into the story that you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I
I,
also think, I was just going to say that I think healing happens when we experience something different. And so if you, again, like that self-pleasuring under the Christmas tree, like if you think, making out with somebody is going to get you punished, like, can you make out with somebody that is actually really safe and there's not going to be any negative precautions, like setting yourself up for success where you can experiment and play and somatically experience something different and not get in trouble or punished or have the bad thing happen that we think could happen. Because when there are these blocks, or when there are these like limitations, perceived limitations or misconceptions about the way that we can be in the world, somewhere inside there's like it's a fear. It's like a decision of defeat where we've decided that, like, if this happens and this will happen, or like, or am I going to be seen in that? And then what does that mean? So like kind of digging into like, well, what are you really scared of? And then creating an experience for yourself when you can actually experience the thing that you want to have in a really healthy, positive way.
Yeah, I think that's so much more easily said than done, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
especially I'm sure you see it with your clients. I'm sure, I mean, if you've been told something your entire life by your caregivers and your role models and people you're supposed to listen to, and like a whole religion's been based around it. I mean, I'm just, it's just, and then all of a sudden you have to leave it type thing, it's much easier said than done. So how do you even get them started on that journey?
There's two things that come up for me. First is like, you have to want it. I feel like there has to be a desire for you to break out of that. Like I have clients from all over the world, and I have a client in Japan right now who has
I wanted to touch
never,
upon that one too.
yeah,
Yeah,
has
but
never talked about sex, and doesn't talk about sex with her husband. And it's been so beautiful to be able to hold that space where she can actually express herself and be heard in that. But again, her desire is there. Like, she wants to break out of that and wants to experiment and try. So I think that, especially when it comes to sexuality, it's going to be like a testing journey. It's going to be something that's going to make you look at all of your shadows. Like, if there's any healing path, it's going to be a shadow work path. It's sexuality, I
mm-hmm.
feel. And so that first point is like, is getting really clear on what your desire is, and also getting really clear on why you want it and how it's going to help you. Like, looking at the what, why, and the how. And the other piece I would say that you kind of touched on before is the power of community. This is something that I've been talking about in so many of my spaces recently, because again, like, moving into the Western world, we've moved out of the collective and into the individual. And we have this immense external and internal pressure that says we need to figure it out on our own, and we need to do it on our own, and it has to be perfect, and we can't digress, and there's no mistakes allowed to be made. And it's just not true. And my invitation would be, like, if it feels too scary and if it feels really heavy to do, like ask for support. I would
Mm-hmm.
not be where I am today if I did not have healers and mentors and guides and coaches along every step of the way, especially with sexuality, because the me literally just 3 years ago would cry at any conversation of sex. I mean,
Oh
every
wow.
partner that I had would come forward with like, you never initiate, and I never feel like you like want to have sex with me or come on to me. And I would instantly just go into these tears, like not understanding why it had such a negative charge for me and why I just couldn't be like everybody else that I felt like I witnessed. And so
And where
it
did it
it
stem
can
from for
shift.
you?
And it was a sexual education from my father that said men only ever want one thing. No matter what they tell you, all they ever want is to get in your pants. And so there was always this like taking energy paired with like physical and emotional abuse growing up, where the masculine men in my life didn't stop it and just let it kind of happen. There was this like, well, men aren't safe, they don't protect me, and will they just violate me and take after everything. And then I think that spiraled into like being out in the world and feeling unsafe, because there's great men and there's also not great men, just like there's great women and there's not so great women, right? So like kind of becoming a magnet for that and then being in abusive relationships one after the next. And so again, it goes back to that original point of trauma. Like I thought I had sexual trauma in my childhood for years because of how I felt about sex in my body, and there wasn't any sexual trauma. It was just
Interesting.
societal programming and my experience of myself and my body.
Interesting. Hmm. That's amazing that that was only 3 years ago. And just hearing you talk about it now is like, wow, you're so open talking about sex and sexuality, and you're helping people as well on their own sexual journeys. So that's quite amazing. I mean, was it like 3 years ago that you realized that you wanted to go on this path, this journey of becoming a sexologist, or was it before that?
Yeah, I was like I mentioned, my story kind of started in the health and fitness space. I originally started out as a holistic health coach and had like my first spiritual awakening back then, and then journeyed through like eating disorders and raw veganism and healing from really severe adrenal fatigue, and then all of my eating disorders and the negative relationship that I had with myself coming back. And so um, it was like a peeling back the layers of this like self-love and worthiness piece. And then as I made my way into the relationship realm and looked at the abuse and again peeled that back and was left with a really big sexual trauma, I knew that that was the next level of work for me. And when I went through the personal healing that I had, it was just the biggest transformation that I've ever experienced or encountered. And it had felt like the most powerful healing modality ever. And so I just knew that I had to do it. And that's what's got me here today.
That's awesome. And that brings me to another question. Like, what type of training does a somatic sexologist have to go through? Yeah, what type of training did you have to go through to get to where you are today to be able to help other people? Yeah.
Combination of both like educational work, like school work, and then also hands-on work. One of the things that I was thinking of before when you were speaking about you going through the sex ed course and like looking at all of these fetishes, like that's part of a sexological bodywork training is like showing all of these videos and looking at all of these different fetishes and things that could potentially kind of jar you and throw you off, because as a sex educator, as a sexological body worker, there needs to be like a neutrality there, because if there is deep shame, like you can't be showing that shame. So lots of table work experience, hands-on experience with bodies,
What do
and
you
doing
do? Sorry, what do you do in the table work? Like, what do you mean, like massages or like feeling different energies or?
it's a combination of like hands-on body work where basically we're looking for tension spots in the body, because where there's tension there's usually memories. So for example, like I worked on a man once where I got like right into a spot in his calf, and the body will start to like bring the memory up and forward, and then we kind of play like improv, like, okay, this is a pain spot, like what are you holding there, what's in there, who's in there, and then the memory will surface. And for him it was a memory of his dog, and it's like, okay, where's your dog, where are you? I'm in my backyard, and I'm like, okay, how old are you? I'm 10 and the dog's barking, and okay, what else? And I just punched my sister in the face and I'm crying because I hurt her and I didn't mean to. And so there's like this deep grief and shame around hurting this sister of his, and not meaning anything by it, right? But like the memory holding on to that, because there's deep shame and there's pain in there. So allowing the body to clear that by perhaps reenacting that whole experience, and me stepping in as a sister, and blindfolds are on, so you're very dropped into this like space, where it feels really real. And it's kind of like, I've had some people say it's similar to like a plant journey where you're in it.
A what journey? A plant
Like a plant,
journeys?
yeah, like an ayahuasca ceremony or something like that, where you're just
Oh,
like
okay.
in,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so like reenacting that, where I get to actually step in as a sister, and like he gets to apologize and he gets to be heard, and I get to receive it as the sister, and love him and hold him and like hug him, and somatically like feel your sister, like feel like, and letting that complete fully. um I
Wow,
forgot the original
fascinating.
question that you had, but
Oh my
Oh,
gosh,
and then
wait, what
I
was
think,
the, I don't
well,
remember
I
the
think
original question.
the training. So like,
All right.
so that's like the somatic portion where we're working on the entire body. The sexological body portion is actually working with the genitals, because if you have sexual trauma, they're going to live there.
Mm.
So if you like, before my sexological body work stuff, like pain in my vagina when having sex, like not feeling numb, feeling like just the depth didn't feel good. That is stored energy in the body. That's stored energy and emotion in our yoni, especially like the deeper you go, because these different points have different spots. So like our G spot will hold stuff, but usually our A spot will hold a lot.
What's an A spot?
And it's a little bit deeper than the G spot, and it's a little
Oh,
bit deeper before the cervix. So they'll hold like often all these memories. So usually when working with female clients, the A spot will hold a lot of tension. And
so wait,
so
so
you
do
can,
you actually like get in there with your female
yeah.
clients and you do?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah, there's
interesting.
internal work. Hmm.
Oh, so what do you do? Like, do you like what is the goal there? Is to just to get them to remember their suppressed memories, or to give
Yeah,
them
that's part
orgasm,
of it.
or
Part of it. So part of like the first few sessions are more about clearing, like
hmm.
clearing the tension points, clearing the pain that's there. If there's numbness, like that's still a sensation. So like starting to bring sensation into those numb areas. So it's almost like when we start at our baseline, like when we're born, we don't have this pain or stories or trauma or anything, right? So we start at this like full capacity. And as we start to collect, we collect the pain. We are receivers anatomically as women. Men are the penetrators. So, like when you have a sexual encounter with a male, there's an energy loop that's happening. So, if you're having sex with a man who is really freaking angry, like you're sucking in that energy,
Hmm.
and that can get stored and locked too if we're not mindful or like
That's true, huh?
doing
Interesting.
energetics and reiki and things like that. So basically like it gets stored it gets stored there because that's where we're taking it in.
Mm.
And so we start to build this like pain and this numbness, and then to get back to this baseline of like full pleasure, full capacity, we need to like go back in and feel all of these things, release it. So again, I'll use me as an example, but so many memories of ex-partners coming up, like just me holding onto their pain, me clenching onto their hurt, their traumas, because I decided that I needed to hold it. And so, when pressing into those tension spots, yes, memories might surface. You might have specific memories surface. Like if you've ever been raped or had any sexual assault, that will absolutely most likely surface. And it might not be completely true. Like it might be fabricated versions of the experience, but it doesn't matter, because it's still real for you. And then we can play and work with that. And so then after the first few sessions, once we start to clear a lot of that, there starts to like your body comes online, like
Mm.
all the numbness, all of the spots where there was pain and tension will come online, and your body will start to like really come alive. And you are able to experience way more pleasure in all of the areas of your body. And again, these meridian lines and like points that are connection, like sex is just moving meditation, and also we're working like eros is an energy exchange, and so you're basically just moving energy when you have sex. And so what
Did you
we're
say,
doing,
sorry, you said that sex is just moving meditation? Is that what you said?
I did,
Oh,
yeah, and that it's also like an energetic exchange. It's energy. So like you can move the energy, like tantra, for example, is just
mm-hmm.
moving the energy. Like I said before, like we are receivers as women. So if you picture like a female body and a male body, they penetrate, right? So there's like a plus sign on their genitals and there's a negative on ours, and
Mm-hmm.
as women. So it's this loop of like penetration energy. We come in, we bring the energy all the way up, and then we can shoot it back out through our heart, and it's this loop. Like that's tantra.
Mm-hmm.
So with somatic, the sexological body work, you're moving the energy up in through the chakras, up to the heart, opening the throat, having more sexual, like more expression from the throat center and through the heart.
I'm assuming that as you're doing this, it sounds very intricate, by the way. And well, first of all, how many hours does this usually take? Like, does this take hours? You mentioned the
The
first 2 hours. I'm like, wow, how long are they here for?
a full sessions, like full table work session is 3 hours, and like
Okay.
right now, especially like I can do a lot of this virtually. Like I
Oh,
teach
wow.
this, how to do this with yourself in my programs that are virtually. You can go deeper when you have a practitioner. It goes back to that piece of community. Like when you're in a safe held space, you can let go more and you can drop in deeper. So there's work that you can do on your own, there's work that you can do with practitioners, and there's work you can do with community.
And I'm sure that you like kind of talk them through it, right? Like every step of the
Mm-hmm.
way. And it sounds very like yeah, it sounds very meditational to use your word, and also almost like hypnotherapy. Almost it reminds me of. Yeah.
Yeah, and to go, you mentioned orgasm on the table, and just to speak to that a little bit, like there's a science behind it too. It's not just like this woo-woo piece, but when there's only a couple ways to shut off the frontal cortex, which is responsible for our fear center, like it's our ego. And the four ways to do that is through orgasm, hypnosis, coma, and plant medicine. So when we're on the table and we start to get into these really heightened erotic states, we're like feeding you affirmations that we've come together,
Mm.
that we've created together, that are actually reprogramming. So let's say, like, a typical one is like not feeling safe in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So the first few sessions, like, I'm safe in my body, I'm safe to use my voice, I'm safe to express myself. And you can like reprogram the body and the psyche, the subconscious. Like the body is the seat of the subconscious mind. So reprogramming it in a way where you get to create a new story. So if your story has always been like men are not safe and your sexual expression's not safe, we might play with affirmations like it's safe to come out and play, it's
Mm.
safe to express myself sexually, like something like that.
Okay, interesting. And then you get people in an erotic zone in order to better reciprocate these affirmations. Because what you're saying
Mm-hmm.
is that we're more, what's the word, reciprocal?
Like more receptive because
More
their frontal
receptive.
cortex
Yeah.
is like
When we're
off.
in an erotic state. Oh, how interesting. Wow, I never knew that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What do you do when you come across clients like that? Like the whole culture is kind of like that. They're taught not to enjoy sex. And what if like their husbands, saw it as a bad thing for them to show that they were enjoying their sexuality? And also just generally, like, what are your thoughts around that whole thing?
Yeah, so I will say that most of my clients are either American. I've worked with a lot of Europeans, a lot of Australians, and a lot of Canadians. So this is my first Japanese client. And um, the first thing that comes up for me when you spoke, and this kind of is going back to what I was sharing before, is that I feel like it all stems from sexuality. Like, one of my mentors is always like, all of the war, the hate, like the awful shadow expressions of what's happening in our world is because of a lack of sexual expression. Like, and I think that's where there's a lot of healing potential in the BDSM space, because you might want to like play as a sadist or masochist and love inflicting pain, but like, can you do it in a consensual space where
Mm.
the other person is actually finding pleasure? But what happens when you don't have that part of you acknowledged, accepted, and what happens when that part of you is not safe to play and it
You
gets really
mean
loud?
the part of you that wants to inflict pain and
Sure.
dominate?
Yeah, like just like that one aspect or that one archetype, like dominance, right? That
Mm-hmm.
likes to be in control. Like if you don't have a place to direct that, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to get expressed everywhere else in the world. And so when I heard you talking about Japanese porn and how it's like kind of violent, it just makes me feel like, okay,
Mm.
there's this like suppression
Mm-hmm.
of like everyone's sexuality, I'm sure, especially women. And so men are also probably taught to be really dominant in that way, and they might be taught that that's how sex should be. And that's why I find myself just so passionate about sexuality, because I feel like in the sexual space, like another mentor calls it like the dungeon, but like take it in the dungeon, like you're experiencing this real world problem, like bring it into the sexual space in a consensual container where you get to play out those archetypes for you, like the shadow aspects, right? Like even everything that's happening in our country right now with Trump, like religion, I mean, politics aside, like it's a shadow aspect of the masculine, like the Me Too movement, all of these pieces. But like, if we can look at our shadow and accept them and find healthy ways of expressing them, and I feel like it would really shift the way that we showed up in the outside world. Like, instead of bringing your anger out to those around you, what if you channeled it into a sexual energy that again is consensual and it's for everyone's pleasure. And then to answer the part about culture, I think like to me, I like to simplify things, and I like to kind of cross like the hurdles when they come forward, if that makes sense. But I feel like it is a similar process of like what is, again, like what was taught for you, like what was taught to you about sex, what do you believe about sex, what is your culture. And so what I find with all of my group coaching programs, and this is why I love like group settings, is that we all come from so totally different backgrounds, different cultures, different upbringings, different like emotional abuse experiences, like all of these things, and everybody comes together in this one place. And there's like a unity there. And so I feel like your upbringing might be so different and your culture might be so different, but it's like still unlearning. Like it feels like to me the unlearning process is quite similar from like a very zoomed out perspective, what people are going to experience it so differently, but it's still an unlearning and a remembering of who you are at your core, like a divine being, and uniting your sexuality with your spirituality ultimately. Like
That is
they're not
so
separate.
interesting. Yeah, interesting that you keep using the word unlearning. That's yeah, interesting that you see that as like key to changing people's. I mean, it makes sense, changing people's beliefs or opening them up to their own sexuality. I also do have to say that, like, being of, someone that was raised in a more modest place, and also just being a person, I'm very pro sexuality, pro, like, all this. I don't see porn as like a bad thing. And, like I said, that course on human sexuality really had, I think, a profound impact on the way that I viewed a sex. But I do have to say that there also is, I think, something beautiful around modesty. Like there is, like, to a certain extent. Of course, not to the point where women and men can't enjoy sex, but I mean, there's something, I think, with the Western society that's like so brazen and like everything so sexual. And even for me, sometimes it gets to be a bit too much. Like if I'm watching a lot of movies, I've realized a lot of American movies comedies fall back on sex humor, like, like cheesy sex humor or dirty sex humor. And I've like just never found it that funny. I'm just like, oh, like, to me, it feels kind of like cheap, because of course, sex is sacred. That's the way that I approach it, at least. That the way that I see it is that, like, it's a spiritual, it's sacred, it's beautiful. It's something that, however you choose to do it, whoever you choose to do it with, it's, so much more than just the act of, a thing in a hole, right? Type thing. So but I do feel like sometimes I do think about that, and I think not necessarily conflicted, but I do feel like people in the Western society, like, sometimes might not understand the beauty of the modesty that is in some of the more Eastern thinking. Although, things are changing now, even of course, even in the East, like everything's kind of just merging together, and people are a lot more sexually active, couples, young people and stuff. But yeah.
Well, I feel like also, like, to me, the way that I take that is that, like, I think because sex was so shamed, and I think like it's been, like, if you compare us to different sexual education systems that are in Europe, like a client of mine who's an assistant, she works on my team, we did a podcast together about sexual education, and she did her whole thesis on it, and she was talking about our sexual education system, I think in comparison to like Sweden's or something. And it was vastly different. They start their sex ed in like kindergarten, but it starts out with
In
perhaps like
Sweden?
boundaries. I don't know if it was Sweden, don't quote me on it. But like boundaries, consent, like touch,
Wow.
like basic principles of like teaching agency over your body. And so I think that if you think about the way the Western world looks and relates to sex and sexuality, it is a shadow side. Like that's not totally true. there can be a lot of, it's encoded with a lot of shadow is what I
Mhm.
want to say. It's
I think,
encoded with a lot of shadow because
yeah,
it's been something that's been so shamed and
yeah.
so taboo, but it's so innate in who we are that instead of knowing how to show up in these healthy ways to truly honor it, there's this like very toxic expression and projection of it. And so it shows up in our movies and our TV shows because it's like it's everywhere, yet it's not actually talked about in a
Mhm.
real way. Like it's misinformation in
Mhm.
every way,
Yeah,
not
you're
actually.
right. Yeah, yeah. No, now to think about it, yeah, no, it's not necessarily Eastern versus Western mentality. It's because in the Western culture also, yeah, it's been shaped so much by religion, by certain religions that have shamed sex. Definitely, absolutely. It's definitely shamed sex and sexuality. I'm watching The Handmaid's Tale right now. I don't know if you've
Mm-hmm.
ever seen it, but
I've heard of it.
it's quite interesting because it really dives into all of that. It dives into religion and how suppressed like the woman's role, and it just like it's like a fictional world where women are basically just following the Bible and just being submissive, and and
And
their
that's where
one
submission
role,
gets a bad
yeah,
rap, right? Like
right.
that's
Their
when you're,
their
yeah.
their one role is to bear children, but I mean submissive as in they're literally raped.
Right,
Yeah, in the
right,
show.
right, right.
But yeah, no, what's interesting to go with that, I've actually experienced myself. I know of I don't want to like reveal people or whatever, but I definitely know of situations where like men have had problems being dominant. Usually they
Mm-hmm.
don't, right?
Totally.
Usually men aren't, but I knew of someone who was taught as a young kid by I think in Catholic school or something like that, their sex ed class, that they had this whole thing about like rape and not raping women, and just like not forcing yourself and whatever, and then later on in life work was completely submissive and basically unable to really just like go for it like with sex, right? So I think it's very interesting. It's not just for women, it happens with men also. And I think I see that too now, like even more so now with the whole Me Too movement and stuff. Like a lot of times men are confused with this like shift in society, women empowerment and everything. Men are confused, like what can they do, what can't they do, what is considered too forward, what's considered like rapey. I mean, I was just like, I'm from Philadelphia, and Rocky is like a big part of our culture. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
loves the movie Rocky. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I personally have never seen it actually, and I've tried to watch it like 3 times, and I just can't get over how rapey it is. Like, I just can't get past the part where Sylvester Stallone is like, like pushing this really scared girl against the wall, and she can't like go home because he literally leaves her no choice and leaves her stranded in an like empty street at night and tells her how dangerous it is, so she's forced to go up to his place. And then he like basically like he's like, oh, I'm gonna kiss you, you don't have to kiss me back, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
I love your impersonation. I could see it.
Yeah. And then the next day, like, they're happily together on the couch as a couple in love, and I'm like, I just can't get over that. It's supposed to be a love story too.
Yeah, well, I think like that's the other piece of the dominant submissive piece. Like, I'm like in the submissive course, and it's like all the women are like, "Where's the dominant men?" Like, oh my God, we're just like freaking starving. And it's like men don't know what the F to do.
Yeah.
Like they're scared
So what
too.
should they do?
They don't know how to be. I think that if this is something that you want, like get trained
Mm.
for it. Like being a submit, like it's an art form. It
You mean
is like
get trained in being in a
a dom.
BDSM?
Yeah, like we get like a
How
dominance
does one go
training.
about getting trained for that?
There's different schools. Like you can like learn under kink people, you can learn about like dominance and submission. And I think that it's important because again, I think like there are examples of like very unhealthy dominant men, and then there's also like the nice guy, right? So like what I was saying before, where like a lot of women want to like be in control in every way, but then like want the dominant men in the bedroom. Like that just doesn't work. Like if you want a dominant man, you need to like feed him his dominance, but also he needs to feel like he needs to write the relationship to his dominance first, because if he's
Hmm.
in fear that he's going to inflict pain and not under like with power, you have to have the responsibility. And if you and as a dom, like if you're
Like
actually gonna,
Spider-Man.
yeah, but like if you're gonna be a dom, like you have the responsibility of two humans. Yes, the submissive is still um in charge of her experience and her desires and her knows and her boundaries and her edges. And when you're in a subspace, like you're in a different reality, you're not
Mhm.
there, and the dom has full like reign in that to keep you safe and like test the boundaries and the limits within the defined container. But
Mhm.
again, that requires responsibility too. So like you have to have that piece. And so it's like I think that's where so much has flopped, like what I shared in the beginning with the patriarchy and like us now stepping on men. It's like men, actually we need to build them back up into their healthy dominance, because we don't want to do the dirty work, we don't want to fight as women. So we need
Right.
to learn to almost take that step back, have humility, feed and
Right.
build our men up.
I mean,
And yeah.
I generally, I mean, I feel like for the most part, no one likes to tell someone else what to do all the time, you know?
Mhm.
And with that said, like when you were saying, I don't know if I fully agree with the whole, like, you know, a person can only be dominant or submissive if they're like that, like in other parts of their life, because I also know of many cases where, you know, men are like I was saying earlier, like they will seek out situations where they can be dominant or submissive because, you know, normally in their role in life they are the opposite way, you know, so it's like
Totally.
a form of release for them. And I think it's very much the same, like whether it's necessarily BDSM or not, you know. I see that a lot in just relationships in general, where, you know, one person who wears the pants like normally, like, you know, in a relationship, are actually the ones who are totally submissive, like in the bedroom type thing. So I've seen that quite a bit, but I think it's amazing how open you are. Obviously it's your profession and a profession and your job, but it's amazing how open you are with these topics and with BDSM, you know, because it's one of the more common fetishes, right? I mean, do you know, I don't know if you know any stats or anything, but like how common is BDSM?
I don't know for certain. I'm not sure with numbers off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, I am shocked sometimes when, you know, like if it's brought up in conversation or something, and like there's still people that are like, "Oh my gosh, that's so weird." Like, you know, and I'm like, "Oh, but they, you know, in sex shops they sell whips and all sorts of things like in every sex shop, so it must be very common."
I mean, I think like I mentioned before, polarity. Like it's about like I think when the relationship dies and when sex starts to go down the shitter, for lack of a better term, it's like the polarity died somehow. Like there's an equal playing field, and maybe the woman's wearing the pants and the man's like doing, and then there's like no sexual chemistry. Like the eros is
Mm.
gone. And so I think with BDSM, there's very clear, distinguished roles, like who's the giver, who's the receiver, who's in control, who's surrendered. And that creates a polarity where Eros can like exist and play and go deep and far,
What is Eris?
like sexual energy.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that there were schools, by the way, for this. Are these like in-person courses, or, I
I
mean,
think there's probably both.
how interesting.
Yeah, I think I forget. I'm gonna keep saying Sweden. I'm probably wrong, but there's a dom that I know that, like, in a different country, like, it's actually legal for you to do this, to like do BDSM work, where women will go to a dom and like have a 3 hour
Oh,
session of BDSM
Amsterdam,
play.
right?
It might be, it might be, yeah, but like it's like
I saw that
it's
in
an
Euro
actual
Trip.
thing. Yeah,
Do you remember that part? Lucy Lawless played the Dom. She
oh,
had like a whip, or she had something, and she was like basically like butt raping
that's
one of the
awesome.
main characters. You know, of course, it's like
Oh my
comedy.
gosh.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was
My
Lucy
body worker
Lawless.
always, and there's like a safe word that's like some
Oh yes,
ridiculous, like
it was like a
not able.
really
Yeah,
long safe word, and he couldn't say it.
totally.
But that's amazing that you have to go to school for this. Like I
You
had
mean you don't have to. I think that it's a great way to be trained in like how to do it eloquently. Like it's an art
is that
in a
only for
way.
doms, or is it also for
No,
subs
for
too?
submissive too.
Oh, ooh, I wonder
Mm-hmm.
what you learn in sub school. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. How to surrender, how to be a good
Yeah.
sub and to feed your man, I would say.
Awesome. Amazing. Amazing. Well, Julianne, I always like to end all of my audio podcasts with this question, which is, if you were to come across someone, or for all those out there who may be feeling like they're sexually repressed, or they're having shame around their sexuality, what are some words of advice that you can give them?
Hmm. Know that it's all serving you, that it's all part of your process and your journey, and to meet yourself with so much love and compassion and grace. And through that approach, you're going to create so much space for yourself to discover more of who you are, and unlearn like the programming and the things that have created the shame, because you're not born with it. Like we're not born with body shame or body hate, and we're not born with sex shame and sexual like misinformation. Like we don't have that. And so, meeting yourself with that grace, love, and compassion to really be able to look at, maybe what have we collected that we don't want to give back, that we want to give back rather, that like what like beliefs or stories of like or truths have you taken on that you don't want anymore, and just start to kind of like weed your garden ultimately, and pick out the weeds and the stories that you don't want, and start to cultivate the flowers that you do want to grow, and water those plants. Um and if you feel like it's heavy work on your own, to reach out to a professional for support and help, because I think that it's a beautiful thing to share and be witnessed in. And there's so much power in the witnessing, when we're being witnessed in our healing, especially with sexuality. I mean, I just see it with women all the time in my programs, like, and other spaces that I'm in. Like it's like the coming together and being witnessed in it, and like fully being realized in who you are, and your purity and your innocence, and connecting that to your sex is just, it brings you back to a wholeness.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think it's important, with what you said with what beliefs are you holding on to, and I think you're basically saying, like, learn to choose, choose your own beliefs, choose which beliefs you want to keep and which ones, like you said, to throw out. But it's important to remember that someone told you something, like, as human beings, in the span of psychology and what we pick up and what makes us who we are in our personality. Like, so much of it is just being told things, just being
Mm-hmm.
told, so it
Totally.
doesn't necessarily mean that it's real. It's just somebody
Mm-hmm.
told us this, someone told us we should be like this, and then we later in life think that's what we should be like, but that's
Yeah.
actually not the case. So yeah, finding your authenticity, and yep, and power of sexuality. Awesome. Awesome, Julianne. Well, thank you so much. This has been a very interesting, empowering discussion. Julianne Vacarro, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you.